Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a new series, Mythical Recordings. In other words, do these recordings live up to their reputations? And that's an interesting question. Some of them will, some of them won't. Most of them, I think, won't. I mean, I'm trying to select things that are justifiably famous, but which, a lot of us oldsters may have imprinted on and may have a sentimental attachment to. And some of the less current amongst us may still cling to irrationally. And so this is about that. It's also about making sure that people who are new to classical music or new to these works, new to these composers, do not, in a knee-jerk kind of way, just go get the famous one, or the one that you heard the most about, or the one that some crank tells you have to listen to. Because quite often it doesn't work that way. One of the things that I have always said about historical recordings is that there is no historical recording in existence which has not been surpassed in better sound. That doesn't mean that the performance is identical or that there aren't reasons for liking older or historical recordings. There are many reasons for liking them. But there is no work in the standard repertoire that you cannot get in fabulous sound in a modern performance. And that's really an important thing, I think. I mean, I really do. Because for a lot of people, if it doesn't sound good, there's no point listening to it, no matter how fabulous the performance is. And the other thing to keep in mind is that if you're new to a work, you're not going to know how good the performance is. And not until you really get a feel for it and then have some serious listening under your belt. And so it makes sense to want to get you started with something that's going to actually allow you to encounter the music in the most positive light, in all aspects of the performance and sonics and all of that stuff. So with that said, we're starting with this very famous recording, which we've spoken about really quite a few times here already. The Jascha Horenstein Mahler Symphony No. 3. Now, this was recorded around, 1972, I think, originally. It was in the 70s. Of course, it doesn't say. But we'll find out. Hang on a minute. This is on Unicorn CDs, and it was one of the first Mahler performances I got, 1970. So there we go. And it was under the supervision of Derek Cook, the great Mahler scholar and writer. I mean, it checked all the Mahlerish boxes. It really did. And in 1970, there weren't that many readily available Mahler 3s. There were more than you might think. I mean, I think Heitinck's was around, Kubelik's may have been around, the Bravanel's was certainly around, Bernstein's was around. Thank God that was his first from the early 60s. I think it was his first major Mahler recording with New York Phil, and that's the reference recording, by the way, which is absolutely fabulous. But in those days, the 60s and early 70s, record labels were still largely national and local. It was very, very difficult to source recordings on Philips, for example, or Deutsche Grammophon if you were in the United States. They were extremely expensive. They were premium priced. You didn't know the artists as well as we know them now. I mean, they were not a household name. Bernard Haitink and the Amsterdam Concertgebouw Orchestra was a regional, grouping at best. However beautifully made the recordings were, and however great the orchestra certainly was. So you had to pick and choose. And the Horenstein recording came out on Nonsuch. It was licensed in Nonsuch, and it was inexpensive, relatively speaking, and it had rave reviews from our friends over the pond in the British musical press, because Horenstein was very highly regarded as a pioneering Mahler conductor in the UK, which he was, and kudos to him for that. I'm not going to jump up and down and just trash the thing. It's a noble effort. And when I had it, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much. I listened to it with great eagerness and anticipation. But even then, I noticed that there were certain things that weren't quite right. Some things were amiss. For example, there were missing timpani. That's amiss. The missing amiss thing. Yeah, there was some timpani missing in the code of the first movement. Right when the big march comes back in, bum ba da da da, boom boom boom, da 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 da, bum boom boom dong da da. All those timpani things, the boom boom booms, gone, missing, not there. The sonics were strange. They favored the winds in brass and percussion. There's one hell of a tam-tam crash at the end of the first movement, which I really enjoyed. But the strings were weak. The orchestra is the London Symphony, yes. And the problem later became when I heard Bernstein and I heard Kubelik and I heard Haitink and some of these other people, it became very, very clear that Horenstein had an issue, and this is an issue very characteristic of his later recordings, which is a rigidity of tempo. He was incapable of varying the pulse in the way that the music demanded. And Mahler demands a lot of varied pulse, especially the first movement. I mean, for example, when the whole thing takes off like crazy in the development section, it's the horn and the strings are doing the sort of wave-like, crazy, rapid, rushing string passages, and then the brass comes in with I mean, all of that's supposed to just go like crazy forward. And Horenstein is just sitting here going, da 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 dum ba dum ba da dum ba da. It's actually just wrong, and it sucks the character out of much of the music. And he's like that throughout the performance. The second movement, has two major tempo areas. Right, you've got the opening theme, and then you've got that the bit that references the finale of the Fourth Symphony. And again, he's just metronomic, and so it goes throughout the symphony. The third movement, the scherzo, well, it's not entirely bad because that means the post-horn solos go a little quicker than they usually do sometimes. You have a very fine alto soloist. Was it Norma Proctor, I think? Right? Norma Proctor sings the third movement. The choral fifth movement is rather colorless compared to some other versions. And the finale, it's okay. It's okay. It doesn't have the intensity that other performances that have a more flexible approach to tempo manage to achieve. And so it's an okay performance. It's a good performance. It's not a great one. And in the years since 1970, whenever this thing was, there have been many superb performances of Mahler's Third. Some really, really, really good ones. And we've talked about some of them. There's Inbal. There's Fischer, who's wonderful in Channel Classics. There were a few more besides that. There's Honeck. There's, you could start listing them. And as a result of that, this has been rendered less than desirable. Also, the transfer to CD isn't very good. I mean, it sounded better on LP, much better on LPs, no question about that. But, the funny thing is that when I say it sort of rendered it useless, you'll say, well, it has special insights, it has special... Well, that's the point. It doesn't really. There aren't any moments in this performance that anybody could regard as special that I couldn't point to another performance and say, oh, no, it's much better over here. And most of them are better done by others. So for all that Horenstein was a pioneer, and we could be sentimental about that, and he certainly did his best, and no one's accusing him of not trying. The fact of the matter is that this performance does not live up to its mythical reputation. It simply does not. So go look at the repertoire video for Mahler Symphony No. 3 to see what your other options are. If you're a hardcore Mahler collector, of course you'll collect it anyway. If you're interested in historical Mahler performances that represented the reawakening or the rediscovery of Mahler in the UK and some other places, well, yep, you can get this too. No reason not to listen to it. I'm not telling people to avoid it like death. What I am saying is that the extraordinary claims for this performance are not supported by the audible facts. And that is the essence of this new series. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.